He poured coffee with shaking hands, always kept his head down, never spoke unless spoken to. The young gang members laughed at him, called him weak, easy prey. But when Marcus Thompson pulled a knife and demanded the register money, the old man's eyes changed. And in that moment, Marcus realized he wasn't threatening a helpless waiter. He was staring into the eyes of someone who had seen real violence, real danger, and survived it all. Welcome to Story with Jorge. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden strength and unexpected justice, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These moments change everything. The downtown diner sat on the corner of 5th and Main, wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat that had seen better days. Inside, the air smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, the kind of place where conversations were kept low and nobody asked too many questions. Behind the counter, wiping down the same coffee pot for the 3rd time that morning, stood Robert Chen. At 68, Robert moved like a man carrying invisible weights. His shoulders curved inward, his steps were measured and careful, and his voice rarely rose above a whisper. To the regular customers, he was just the old Chinese guy who'd been working there for the past 5 years, always polite, always invisible. They didn't know his story. They didn't know that the slight tremor in his hands wasn't from age. It was from 25 years of high-stakes police work that had ended in a shooting that changed everything. The diner's owner, Mrs. Patterson, had hired Robert out of pity more than need. He'd walked in one rainy Tuesday, resume in hand, asking for any work available. She'd taken one look at his weathered face in quiet desperation and offered him the evening shift. "Just serving coffee and cleaning tables," she'd said. "Nothing complicated." Robert had nodded gratefully and never missed a day since. The neighborhood wasn't exactly safe. The diner attracted a mixed crowd. Construction workers grabbing breakfast, office workers on lunch breaks, and occasionally members of the local gang known as the Iron Wolves. These young men, mostly in their 20s, would swagger in wearing their colors, speaking in code, making everyone else uncomfortable. But they paid for their food and mostly kept to themselves, so Mrs. Patterson tolerated them. Robert served them like he served everyone else, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. He'd learned long ago that the best way to survive in hostile territory was to become part of the furniture. The gang members barely noticed him, except to occasionally snap their fingers when they needed a refill, or to make jokes about the scared old man who jumped every time they raised their voices. But there was one member who paid more attention than the others. Marcus Thompson, 23 years old, tall and lean with arms covered in tattoos that told stories of a life already too familiar with violence. Marcus had been watching Robert for weeks, noting how the old man always looked down, how he flinched at loud noises, how he seemed to shrink into himself whenever the gang was around. "Easy target," Marcus had whispered to his friend Tony one evening. "Old man's probably got money saved up, lives alone. Nobody would miss him if something happened." Tony had nodded, but something about Robert made him uneasy. Maybe it was the way the old man's eyes sometimes lingered on their table, not with fear, but with something else. Calculation, maybe. Or maybe it was how Robert never seemed surprised by anything, never startled by sudden movements the way truly vulnerable people did. The night everything changed started like any other. Robert was working the closing shift, wiping down tables and refilling sugar dispensers while the last few customers finished their meals. The diner was nearly empty. Just Robert, Mrs. Patterson in the back office counting receipts, and an elderly woman nursing a cup of tea in the corner booth. At 9:47 p.m., the bell above the door chimed. Marcus walked in alone, which was unusual. He typically traveled with at least one other gang member. Tonight he wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, and his hands were shoved deep in his pockets. He chose a booth near the back, away from the windows, and sat facing the door. Robert approached with his usual quiet efficiency. "Good evening. Can I get you something?" Marcus looked up, his eyes cold and focused. "Just coffee." "Black." Robert nodded and returned with a steaming cup. As he set it down, Marcus grabbed his wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make a point. "You know what, old man?" Marcus said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet diner. "I've been watching you. You're scared of everything. Scared of loud noises, scared of us, scared of your own shadow." Robert's face remained neutral, but Marcus felt a slight change in the old man's posture. The tremor in his hands seemed to still. "I'm just here to work," Robert said quietly. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Yeah, well, work's about to get interesting." He released Robert's wrist and reached into his pocket. The handle of a knife became visible, just enough to make the threat clear. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. "You're going to walk over to that register, open it up, and give me everything inside. Then you're going to forget I was ever here. Because if you don't—" He let the threat hang in the air. Robert stood perfectly still for a moment. The elderly woman in the corner booth was focused on her tea, unaware of the drama unfolding. Mrs. Patterson was still in the back office, the sound of her calculator clicking rhythmically. For all practical purposes, Robert and Marcus were alone. "You don't want to do this," Robert said, his voice still quiet but carrying a new quality. Not fear, but something else. Marcus laughed. "Oh, I think I do. You see, old man, I've been planning this for weeks. I know you work alone most nights. I know Mrs. Patterson stays in the back office. I know the register usually has at least $200 in it by closing time. And I know you're too scared to do anything about it." That's when Robert's eyes changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden movement, no visible transformation. But something shifted behind his eyes. A door opening onto a room that had been locked for years. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, something that made Marcus's confident smile falter. "You're making a mistake," Robert said, and now his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The old man's posture had changed too, still bent with age, but somehow more balanced, more grounded, like someone who had stood in dangerous places before and knew how to survive them. "The only mistake," Marcus said, trying to reclaim his confidence, "is you thinking you have a choice here." He pulled the knife fully from his pocket, a 4-inch blade that gleamed under the diner's fluorescent lights. Robert looked at the knife, then back at Marcus's face. "Son," he said, and something in that single word made Marcus's hand tremble slightly. "I spent 25 years as a police officer. 25 years dealing with people who thought they were dangerous. 25 years learning that the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one who looks the least threatening." Marcus's eyes widened. This wasn't going according to plan. "You want to know why my hands shake?" Robert continued, taking a small step closer. "It's not because I'm scared. It's because the last time someone pulled a knife on me, I had to make a choice. And that choice ended with a 20-year-old kid bleeding out on a warehouse floor while I tried to save his life." The knife in Marcus's hand was no longer steady. "You're lying." "Am I?" Robert's voice was still quiet, but now it carried the authority of someone who had faced down armed criminals, who had walked into dark alleys and emerged alive, who had made the hard choices that keep society from falling apart. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see my nephew. Same age, same anger, same belief that the world owes him something. He's in prison now, Marcus, 25 to life for armed robbery." Marcus's mouth went dry. "How do you know my name?" "Because I know everyone who comes into this diner. I know you live in the apartment complex on Elm Street. I know you drive the blue Honda with the dented bumper. I know you've been watching me for weeks, planning this moment. And I know you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life." The knife was shaking now. Marcus tried to reassure himself that this was just an old man, just a scared waiter who was trying to talk his way out of trouble. But something in Robert's eyes, a depth of experience, a knowledge of violence that came from years of living on the edge, made Marcus's throat tighten. "You think you're tough?" Robert asked, taking another step closer. "You think carrying a knife makes you dangerous? Let me tell you something about real danger. Real danger doesn't announce itself. Real danger doesn't make threats. Real danger just acts." Marcus backed up a step, bumping into the booth behind him. "Stay back, old man. I'm not afraid of you." "Yes, you are," Robert said simply. "And you should be, because I'm not the helpless victim you thought I was. I'm the man who spent 2.5 decades hunting people like you. I'm the man who learned to read violence in someone's eyes before they even knew they were planning it. And I'm the man who's tired of watching young men throw their lives away for nothing." The diner seemed to hold its breath. The elderly woman in the corner booth had finally noticed something was wrong and was quietly reaching for her phone. Mrs. Patterson's calculator had stopped clicking. "Put the knife down, Marcus," Robert said. "Walk away, go home. Think about what you really want from life, because if you take one more step toward that register, your life is going to change forever." Marcus stared at the old man, his mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. The scared waiter was supposed to hand over the money and beg for mercy. Instead, he was facing someone who spoke with the calm authority of someone who had been in far worse situations and survived them all. "I can't," Marcus whispered. "I need the money. I owe people. If I don't—" "If you don't what?" Robert interrupted. "If you don't rob an old man at knife point, if you don't commit a felony that will destroy your future, Marcus, whatever you owe, whatever trouble you're in, there are other ways to handle it. But the moment you use that knife, the moment you take money that doesn't belong to you, you become someone you can't come back from." Marcus's hand was shaking so badly now that he could barely hold the knife. "You don't understand. These people, they'll kill me if I don't pay them back. And the law will kill your future if you do this," Robert replied. "I've seen it happen 100 times. Young men who thought they had no choice, who thought one crime would solve their problems. They're all in prison now, Marcus, every single one of them." The knife clattered to the floor. Marcus stood there, breathing hard, his face pale and confused. "I don't know what to do." Robert bent down slowly, picked up the knife, and walked over to the coffee pot. He poured Marcus a fresh cup, added sugar without being asked, and set it down on the table. "You start by sitting down," Robert said. "Then you tell me who you owe money to and why. Then we figure out a way to handle it that doesn't involve you throwing your life away." Marcus slumped into the booth, his hands shaking as he reached for the coffee. "Why are you helping me?" Robert sat down across from him, his movements careful and deliberate. "Because 25 years ago I was a young police officer who thought every criminal was just a bad person making bad choices. Then I met a kid named David Chen, my nephew. Same age as you, same desperation, same belief that he had no options. I arrested him, testified against him, and watched him get sentenced to life in prison. I did my job, but I never tried to understand him. I never tried to help him." Marcus looked up, surprised. "That's why you became a waiter." "That's why I quit being a cop," Robert corrected. "I realized I'd spent 25 years arresting people without ever trying to save them. So I took this job, in this neighborhood, hoping maybe I could do some good before it was too late." They sat in silence for a moment. Two men from different worlds, different generations, brought together by a moment of crisis that had transformed into something neither of them expected. "The people I owe money to," Marcus said finally, "they're not the kind you negotiate with." "Then we don't negotiate," Robert replied. "We find another way. But first, you need to understand something, Marcus. This moment, right now, this is your crossroads. You can walk out of here and go back to the life you were living, the life that brought you here with a knife in your hand. Or you can choose something different." Marcus stared into his coffee. What if I'm not strong enough to choose different? Robert smiled for the first time that evening. Strength isn't about not being scared, son. Strength is about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. And you just put down a knife instead of using it. That tells me you're stronger than you think. The elderly woman in the corner booth quietly put her phone away. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back office, saw the two men talking quietly, and decided to give them some privacy. Outside, the city continued its nightly rhythm, unaware that inside a small diner, two lives had just changed forever. Marcus stayed for another hour, talking to Robert about his debts, his fears, his complete lack of direction. Robert listened without judgment, offered practical advice, and by the end of the night, they had a plan. Not a perfect plan, not an easy plan, but a plan that didn't involve Marcus destroying his future. When Marcus finally left, he shook Robert's hand. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Robert watched him walk away, then began cleaning up the diner for the night. His hands were steady now, his movements sure. For the first time in 5 years, he felt like he was doing the job he was meant to do. The next morning, Mrs. Patterson found a note on her desk. Robert was quitting his job at the diner, but not to disappear. He was opening a small counseling office 3 blocks away, focusing on young men who were facing the same choices Marcus had faced. He thanked her for the opportunity and promised to stay in touch. Marcus kept his word. He got help with his debts, found legitimate work, and slowly rebuilt his life. He stopped by Robert's office every few weeks, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to check in. He never forgot the night he learned that the most dangerous person in the room was the quiet old man who had chosen mercy over justice. Robert never went back to police work, but he never stopped serving and protecting. He just learned to do it one conversation at a time, one moment of crisis at a time, one young man at a time. Because sometimes the most important arrests are the ones that never happen, and sometimes the greatest victories are the ones nobody ever hears about. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who chooses not to be dangerous at all.